Good Wednesday afternoon to you. Hope you're having a great day. Thanks for joining us on Sports4CLE. Tim Bielik will be along a little bit later on. We'll talk plenty of Browns with the cleveland.com and Plain Dealer reporter. And we have a treat today as we're going to talk plenty of Browns with AP sports reporter Tom Withers. We're also going to sneak in some Indians and Cavs with Tom. Let's welcome in Tom Withers. Tom, as always, appreciate the time. Let's start. CBS Sports came out with their rankings for Defensive Rookie of the Year candidates. Two of the Browns' top two picks make the list. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah checks in at 3, and the first-round pick, Greg Newsome, checks in at 9. They have Jamin Davis, linebacker from Washington, as 1, and Azeez Olajuwon from the Giants as the top 2. What do you make of that? How do you think JOK fits into this Browns defense?
Yeah, really tough, Dave, as you know, and great to see you. Really tough to assess rookies right now because they are rookies and we haven't seen them really do anything on the field other than, last week kind of running around a little bit out there in individual drills. So, I think the good thing for the Browns is that they took guys that they know fit needs for this team. And in JOK, I think you have quite a unique player, a very versatile player. Kind of this new breed of linebacker that we're seeing in the NFL, not necessarily the prototype that we remember, not the Dick Butkus, Ray Nitschke types. These are guys that are more like safeties than they are linebackers, guys that can play in space, guys that can cover tight ends like Travis Kelce and this new breed of tight end that's out there. So I think in JOK, you have a player that Joe Woods, the defensive coordinator, is going to be able to do a lot of things with. I think you're going to see him lined up on the outside. I think you'll see him on the inside. I think you'll see him back in coverage. I think you'll see him coming off the edge on blitzes. So a really interesting player, and I think, again, a player that fits a very specific need for the Browns.
Greg Newsome, also another guy that's young, and, Browns aren't sure what they're going to have in Greedy Williams. You never want to hear nerve related to an athlete in the shoulder in particular for a contact sport. What do you make of Newsome and what he brings to the table and why he's thought of in that top 10 listing there?
As a Big Ten guy, I did watch a lot of Northwestern games last year, and I have actually a lot of friends that went to school there. And so a little part of my heart pulls for the Wildcats. So I did pay a lot of attention to Greg Newsome, and I really liked what I saw. It was Pat Fitzgerald, the coach at Northwestern, who I can't say enough good things about, plays a very interesting defense up there. And, they did a lot of zone coverage, but they did a lot of press man-to-man too, which you don't necessarily see a lot in college other than the big programs. Your Alabama, LSU, Ohio States are going to play up on wide receivers. But Northwestern did the same, and Greg Newsome more than held his own against a lot of good wide receivers. Unfortunately for them, he got hurt in the Big Ten championship game, and we also didn't get to see a chance for him to match up with Chris Olave, the great Ohio State wide receiver. But, a terrific player. And I'll tell you what, Dave, just being out last week at Browns mini camp, he's one of those guys who really passes the eye test. When you see him out there, you just see how smooth he moves and just the fluidity in general, just to his physique and his body and just the way he carries himself. He just looks like a player. So to your point, I think the Greedy Williams situation is such that they had to make sure they had protection there. And I think we all hope that Greedy can bounce back and be a contributor here, which will be his third year. But in lieu of that, you've got a guy now that you can match up with Denzel Ward and have, potentially two of the top cornerbacks in the AFC on the same team.
And a young guy, just turned 21 fairly recently.
Hard to believe. I mean, when we talked to him too after the draft, I was really impressed with his composure. And then, especially with a lot of these young guys, Dave, I think back to what kind of a knucklehead I was at 20 or 21, and just to think what all these kids at a very young age are having to deal with, having to grow up really fast in their careers. So, again, I think in Newsome and in JOK, two really astute picks by the Browns.
And you know what? I'm glad you brought that up because it certainly seems like Andrew Berry in this front office and Kevin Stefanski know the type of player, air quotes, type of player they want. And there are some definite traits that they look for, and it's those that follow it closely can kind of identify, yeah, that fits what they're looking for.
Totally agree. I think there's a thread that runs through all of these guys, and I don't think it's any accident either, Dave, that they've been taking these guys from the last 2 years out of big programs. I mean, these are all players from accomplished programs. You talk about Northwestern and Ohio State down in LSU and right on down the line. You're getting a quality player. You're getting guys that played against the top competition at the Division I level. So, again, they talk about smart, tough, accountable, all those things. And pretty much all the guys the Browns have taken over the last 2 years have checked all of those boxes.
So we're going to shift our focus here. Now, these are young players who could beat out veterans. This is Dog Pound Daily. And so number one, they have a slash here, Jacob Phillips / JOK. They feel that the second-year linebacker, rather, and the rookie, one of those two they think could very well end up as our starting linebacker.
I could definitely see that, Dave. We saw at the end of last year when Jacob Phillips finally got a chance, he contributed out there. And, I've just talked, at length about what JOK can bring to this defense. So I think that the thing that sometimes maybe we overlook as fans and as media members is that a lot of attention is played to the starters. But listen, you've got to have depth. And I think we learned that last year with the Browns, and we've seen that over the last 10 or 20 years here, man. You can't have enough guys. Guys are going to get beat up. There's going to be, we've seen with Denzel Ward, for example, there's a good chance he's going to miss 3 or 4 games. It's just the nature of the position and just the way he is, physically. So you can't have enough. And in both JOK and in Phillips, I think you have 2 really good quality guys that are going to be a part of a rotation. And again, versatile players that Joe Woods is going to be able to do a lot of things with.
The next guy they have on this list, Grant Delpit, and I think they had big plans for him before he tore his Achilles. Question is that's a tough injury to come back for in any sport, particularly football, as a torn Achilles.
No doubt, Dave. I think he was penciled in as a starter last year before that injury. And you're right. I've seen instances where guys have been back in 8 months, and I've seen instances where it's taken guys, the better part of 2 years to come back from a ruptured Achilles. Now, as you mentioned before, he's got youth on his side. So, young guys tend to heal a little bit quicker. So you got to hope for the best. But, yeah, they had huge plans for Grant Delpit last year. In the small window sample that we got of him last year before we even got to training camp, he stood out. Again, a guy with a great physique, and just the way he carries himself out there, you could tell that he played at the highest caliber in college.
Now another one of these split ones for number 3, Tommy Togiai, the rookie from Ohio State, Jordan Elliott. They feel one of those guys could end up being starting defensive tackle.
100%. And I think, if nothing else, Dave, those guys are going to be in the rotation for sure. I think in Togiai, and as a proud Buckeye and follow the Ohio State program for years, Togiai is a guy who really stood out to me, especially last year, just the way he was able to, his role in that Ohio State defense was just to basically muck things up and, tie up the center and grab a guard and allow other guys to make plays. And he did that well. And there were also times where he was able to put some heat on the quarterback as well. And I think in Jordan Elliott, there's another guy that, again, checks all the boxes, played in the SEC, big, strong, versatile player that they have real high aspirations and high hopes for.
And the fourth one, the last one in this list, Donovan Peoples-Jones, wide receiver, second-year wide receiver. For a 6th-round pick, he contributed quite a bit a season ago.
He sure did. I mean, you could argue that was the catch of the year, right? The game in Cincinnati, the last second play. I wasn't really thrilled with, his return game, but again, a young guy at a position where it's very different when you make that jump from, I don't care whether you played in Michigan or where, and then you go into the NFL. To return punts is a very different thing, but they were really at a need at that spot last year. And I thought he did fine. There were no major mistakes. He didn't cough one up that really cost the Browns anything substantial. So again, a young wide receiver, part of a great receiving group with the Browns. And I can see him being absolutely part of any rotation.
Tom Withers, Associated Press reporter, and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. On the other side of the break, we'll get Tom's impressions from the just completed rookie mini camp that ended Sunday. We'll also talk some things to keep an eye out for in the AFC North. Burning questions in the Browns division. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Life is starting to get back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, try Seek and Help, with full tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tric-edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for summer classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just a mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
Thanks for hanging with us on Sports4CLE. I'm Dave Bacon. We continue to talk Browns football with Associated Press reporter Tom Withers. Tom, how much fun was it to go out and actually watch guys working at football? I can't really say they were practicing. They were kind of going through drills, but you were out there, rookie mini camp. What stood out to you? What kind of grabbed your attention?
Well, number one, it was just good to be outside, and it was good to see some of my media colleagues again. You know, I don't have to tell you, we've all been so cooped up now for more than a year that it was just good to be outside and watching, like you said, watching guys running around on the grass. So, you know, a few things stood out to me. I think first and foremost, Dave, and as I mentioned before with Woo, we'll call him Woo or call him JOK, whatever you want to call him. He's undersized. You know, he's not your typical linebacker. And it's interesting that he chose number 28 that kind of fits him. He looks more like a safety or a bigger cornerback than he does a linebacker. So that kind of stood out a little bit just in terms of his size. And he does move around really well. You know, they just had him going through basically individual drills, but dropping back into coverage. And you can see why, you know, the Browns were enamored with him because he's got all the skill set that you would want to see. Unfortunately, their other linebacker that they took, Tony Fields II, had suffered a foot injury a few weeks ago and was not able to work out outside. So you really didn't have anybody that you could kind of compare Woo to in size-wise. But that stood out to me a little bit. Also, Anthony Schwartz, the wide receiver from Auburn, who has world-class Olympic speed, and you can see bursts of that. And again, they weren't doing anything, you know, too specific. It was mostly, you know, short pass routes and things like that, but he's got that burst, and he's one of those guys. When you see speed like that, it's like when you watch, I always tell people, when you see Odell Beckham Jr. in person on a practice field, you understand what all the hype is about, because there's speed and then there's speed, and that looks like what Schwartz has. So James Hudson, the offensive tackle from Cincinnati, stood out only because he's gigantic. But there were only 18 guys out in the field. You know, they were spread out a little bit, so there wasn't a real good chance to see them do a whole lot. But again, it was good to be outside and get a chance to watch some football and do something other than Zoom calls every other day.
What about the way the coaching staff related to the players? You know, they made a special point of saying, hey, we could stop it and correct the drop and get things corrected immediately. And that's something Kevin Stefanski.
Yeah, it was really the student teacher ratio was way out of control, because you probably had 3 or 4 coaches per player. It was really hands-on. So, and I thought it was interesting too to watch the way Kevin Stefanski and Joe Woods and you know, some of the other coordinators just kind of stood to the side and let some of the, you know, the real specificity go on in terms of like the linebackers coaching, working on particular drills. And there was little, you know, just kind of overseeing in terms of what Stefanski and Andrew Berry were doing. And so, again, there wasn't a whole lot to to pick apart. We were only out there for basically about an hour. We're still not sure what the rest of the offseason is going to look like in terms of media access, or whether or not the veterans are going to be out there for OTAs or what have you. But it was interesting to watch the way they work. I always, whenever I can, I try to take a friend or a family member out so they can see the way that, I think when fans see what really goes into, let's say, a tight ends coach breaking down a way a guy blocks, or a way a guy runs routes, or just the way he stuffs his foot into the ground and makes a cut. When you get really detailed like that, and you're able to see that in practice, you really gain appreciation for what these guys do on Sundays.
Let me ask you something. You mentioned the size of Owusu-Koramoah. Do you think that's kind of the trend of the NFL, because it's such a pass-heavy league, and you're doing 3 wides, sometimes 5 wides? Is that the way the NFL is going?
It is right now, Dave. I don't know if it's here to stay or not, but it clearly is the flavor of the month. And if you're a Browns team and you're looking at, we're probably going to run into Kansas City at some point, and they've got Travis Kelce, and we didn't do a very good job of covering him last year, and so we better figure out how we're going to stop him, or how we're going to stop Tyreek Hill. So you got to find those kinds of players that are going to be able to match up. And I do think that's the way the NFL is going. I mean, we're not seeing any changes in rules that are favoring the defense. It's all about scoring. It's much like the NBA, right? It's who can shoot the threes and who can throw the deep pass. So I think that is where we're headed right now. Again, it's a copycat league. Everybody's looking for those kinds of players, and that seems to be the flavor of the month.
All right, let's switch our focus real quick. CBS Sports burning questions in the AFC North, the Browns division. For the Browns, can Baker Mayfield lead Cleveland to a title? There's a loaded one for you, Tom.
Yeah, well, we're about to find out, aren't we? I've been really impressed, I must say. I was really impressed with the way Baker grew up last year, both as a player and a person. He really seemed to take things seriously. The year before was tough. I mean, he'd be the first to admit that it was a bit of a setback, that he did not capitalize on that great rookie year he had, and he wasn't very good. And he really dedicated himself to his craft in the offseason. He worked on his body, and I just think he grew up a lot. And a lot came at him quick in that first year, right? He had a lot of rookie success. Everybody thought that second year he was going to be able to build off of that, and he didn't. So it was good to see him just kind of take hold of the team last year, take hold of himself. So whether he can lead them to a title right now or not, that's what we're going to find out this year. And the expectations are completely through the roof. And so he's going to have to deal with all that. It's now, a team that's looked at as a very legitimate Super Bowl contender, and he's going to have to be able to deal with it.
How much of a difference do you think it will make for him that he's going to be in his second year in a system for the first time since between his junior and senior year in college, which when you think about that, that's unbelievable.
It's really incredible when you think about it, Dave. I mean, it's like if you and I had a different boss every 6 months or whatever, you're having to adjust to learning, not only a new personality, but a new way of doing things. And then having to, on top of that, learning a new playbook with new language and you name it. So I think it's going to be great for him. I think it's going to allow him to, again, build on what he was able to do successfully last year, learn some of those lessons. And I just think he's had such a really, tough time building relationship with his coaching staff because there has been such turnover. And I think, Kevin Stefanski, for all that he did right last year, and there was a lot, I think one of the best moves that he made was that connection that he made with Baker right out of the gate. He, not long after getting the job, he headed down to Texas and spent time with Baker and his family. And I think that had a lot to do with how well Baker played last year. Before we put this segment to rest, if you had to choose, who wins the AFC North? Is it the Browns? Is it the Ravens? Does it come down to those 2 games where they play each other within the span of 3 weeks? It very well could. I'm cautioning people not to overlook those Pittsburgh Steelers. They're still the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Big Ben is coming back, and he's got a chip on his shoulder, maybe like he's never had before. So, I do not discount them. I'm not going to look too far past a Cincinnati team that's young, but has in Joe Burrow, listen, a guy that's coming back off a pretty serious injury, but, they've got some talent down there as well. And there's no reason to think that they're not going to be good over the next couple of years if Burrow is what we think he is. But yeah, I think it's fascinating, Dave, that the NFL set it up that way where, the Browns are going to have, they're going to play the Ravens, they're going to get a bye week, and then they're going to get the Ravens again. And in that bye week that the Browns are off, I believe the Steelers and the Ravens play each other. So yeah, it's probably going to come down to that. And, listen, I think it's a coin toss at this point. I think you could make a strong argument that one team is better than the other. But hey, listen, and it's also so much better to be talking about this than potentially where the Browns are going to be drafted next year, right? I mean, we've all waited a long time for this to happen.
Yeah, it is. And Cleveland fans enjoy it because it has been quite a while. Tom Withers and I, Associated Press reporter, going to step aside, take a quick time out. On the other side of the break, we'll take a look at number 1 overall quarterbacks. Which of those guys will have the highest win total? Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Life is starting to get back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with full tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tric-edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for summer classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just a mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
Sports4CLE continues. I'm Dave Bacon, talking Browns football with Associated Press sports reporter Tom Withers. Let's take a listen to Peter Schrager, NFL Network's co-host of Good Morning Football. It was posed to him, and this has to do with number 1 overall picks at quarterback. Matthew Stafford and Baker Mayfield. Stafford traded to the Rams. Baker, of course.
Or Baker Mayfield, who got an overwhelming amount of votes from our experts at NFL.com.
Yeah, both are going to be very highly anticipated in those seasons for two teams that are getting Super Bowl talk. I'm going with Stafford. Look at Stafford's offensive coordinators over his 11 years with Detroit. You'd think there'd be 10 different coordinators. No, it was just 4 guys, but 4 very different offenses. Linehan's offense is very different than Lombardi's, which is very different than Jim Bob Cooter's, and then Darrell Bevell, of course, the last few years. Now you add in the Sean McVay, Kevin O'Connell thing, and you can basically say Matthew Stafford's run all sorts of offenses, and he hasn't had the opportunity to work with a coach like this guy yet. So I think it's going to be the combination of so many factors. But I just think McVay has never had a quarterback with the arm like Stafford. Stafford's never had the offensive play caller with the kind of creativity, I would say, of McVay. And then you put it all together, I think they're going to be a really successful team.
Let's welcome Tom Withers back in. And Tom, as I'm listening to that, it occurs to me Baker's had that many offensive coordinators in half the time.
I know. We were just talking about this, right? The whole continuity thing. So, hey, listen, I'm a big Matthew Stafford fan. I think that poor guy spent, probably his best years in Detroit with some pretty lousy teams. And he had, all kinds of change and what have you, much like what we've dealt with here in Cleveland. So, it's tough to say, two teams in different conferences in terms of who's going to win more games. I think both will have successful years. I think both have two really good head coaches running their teams. I think both teams have, made moves. Both teams have good defensive players, number one, which is always going to help a quarterback out, right? You got to get the football back. You got to stop the other team from scoring. So that helps a little bit. So I think it's tough to say which one will win more. Again, I think both are on the brink of having really great years. Who knows? Could be a Super Bowl matchup, right?
So this kind of dovetails off of this, and this was, again, the question that was presented by NFL.com. Which number one overall quarterback has the most wins? And I'll run down the list for you. You've got Trevor Lawrence, who is the number one overall pick by the Jaguars this year. You've got Joe Burrow, number one overall pick by the Bengals in 2020. Kyler Murray, number one overall pick by the Cardinals in 2019. Baker Mayfield, Browns in 2018. Jared Goff 2 years before that. He's now with the Lions. He was drafted by the Rams.
Right.
Jameis Winston, likely to be the Saints starter, was with the Buccaneers. He was the number one overall pick in 2015. Cam Newton, number one overall pick by the Panthers in 2011, now with the New England Patriots. And then Matthew Stafford, number one overall pick in 2009. Of those, which ones do you think are legitimate, playoff Super Bowl type contenders? Who do you think has the most wins?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that the quarterback is an important position, right? If all these guys are going number one, I tell you, Kyler Murray's a guy who fascinates me. I think is just starting to scratch the surface of his potential down there. So, there's a list of some guys that are, borderline busts at this point, right? When you talk about Jameis Winston, really has had an up and down career over the last couple of years. And again, I'll go back to Stafford for a second. I'm really interested to see what change of scenery does for him. I think you'll probably say the same thing of Jared Goff, who I was really high on coming out of college a couple of years ago. So again, I think there's so many other variables, Dave, that come into play here, right? Injuries, not only to these guys personally, but to the playmakers that they have around them. Potential coaching changes, losing streaks, right on down the board. So I think it's really tough to listen. I think Baker Mayfield's got a good chance to win 10 or more games this year, and I'd take that to Las Vegas. I'll put it that way.
Do you kind of see him, and we touched on it a little bit, do you think he has that next level jump inside of him just based on what we've seen and the fact that he hadn't been in a system for 2 years in a row?
I think that's the whole key to it, Dave. I think you're going to see him jump up a level as he gets more and more comfortable with that offense, as he gets more uncomfortable with the play calling, as Kevin Stefanski learns him and vice versa. Again, a lot of it's going to come down to health. I think it really, in some ways helped the Browns last year when OBJ went down, and in some ways it hurt them as well because they didn't have somebody that could stretch the field. But it definitely it put Baker at ease, knowing that he didn't have to necessarily get him the ball, feed OBJ to keep him happy and all that kind of stuff. So I also think that there's a good part of that as far as Beckham is concerned, that he realized how much he missed the game when he was away, and he's going to come back hungry and ready to go. And clearly with the Browns and this 1-2 dynamic punch they have at running back, which is unlike anybody else in the league has, that only makes Baker Mayfield a better quarterback. And I think, again, with continuity and comfort and, just time, there's no reason to think that this, not only can Baker take it to another level, but I think this Browns offense can as well.
Let's talk a little bit about Sheldon Richardson before we move on. So now there are some reports where he is talking to the Saints, the Chargers, and the Lions. Again, what do you think happens with Sheldon Richardson? Do you think there's still a chance that he comes back? Obviously money is going to be the determining factor.
It is. I think, Dave, this has gone pretty much the way I had expected it to, is that he and his agent were going to go out and kind of do a tour of the NFL and see what fits and see what teams are willing to kind of, meet him halfway to whatever that contract was with the Browns that they didn't want to go forward with. So, yeah, I still think there is a chance. I do think, though, that some of these moves that we saw in the draft and free agency kind of addressed the idea that, maybe Sheldon Richardson doesn't come back. And now you've got a guy like Tommy Togiai who you could plug in there. You've got Tack McKinley. You've got a rotation. You've got Andrew Billings coming back. I think everybody forgets last year that, he optioned out of the season because of COVID-19, and he's going to be back. A pretty substantial free agent signing for the Browns last year. So I think there's still a chance with Sheldon. I'd really like to see Sheldon come back. I think those of us in the media really grew to admire him, I'll say, because he went about his job. He seemed to be a real team player. It seemed like everybody liked him in the locker room. And I think that's an important piece. I think, I think you see that with all three major sports here in town, is that you've got to have those locker room or clubhouse guys that are leaders. And I think Sheldon Richardson was that for the Browns last year.
Tom Withers, Associated Press reporter, and I'm going to step aside, take a quick time out. We change our focus a little bit. We're talking Indians and Cavs. When we return, stay with us on Sports4CLE. We'll be right back.
Life is starting to get back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with full tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tric-edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for summer classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just the mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Dave Bacon. We're going to shift our focus and talk a little bit about the Indians. Wrapping up a West Coast trip tonight. They will play the Los Angeles Angels, 8:07 start time. Before yesterday's game, the Indians made a roster move. They sent Andres Jimenez, a young shortstop, down to AAA and recalled a pitcher, J.C. Mejia, who they wanted out in the bullpen. Now, Jimenez, a guy that he acquired in the Francisco Lindor trade, 3 of 23 in May, 0 of 14 with runners in scoring position. A young guy who skipped AAA on his way up. Terry Francona explains the move.
We're going to send Andres back to Columbus and let him kind of play and take a deep breath and try to get himself straightened out, because I think he just kind of got himself into a little bit of a bind where, was having trouble digging himself out. And nothing's changed from how we certainly perceive him as a player. I think he's going to be a really good player. Just sometimes you got to go back and get self straightened out. Like a lot of guys, I mean, April you hear me say a lot. It's true, man. April can be a cruel month. It's cold. Guys are coming out of Arizona feeling good about themselves, and all of a sudden it's 40 degrees, and every hit or every at bat is a chore. And he just seemed like he was trying to do more, and the more he tried to do, his swing got longer. Then he started kind of, he wanted to hit the ball left field, and he was doing it by closing his front shoulder, and then he was flying open. So in actuality, he was making it harder. So he just needs to try to get back to being square. I know they took the leg kick away, just trying to simplify things for him, because if he shoots the ball all over the field, he's going to naturally grow into hitting with some power. But trying to hit for power before you kind of have the basics down is probably backward.
Let's bring back in Tom Withers. And Tom, Jimenez is a guy who skipped AAA when he came up with the Mets. So this, again, it's awfully hard to make adjustments to your swing at the major league level, especially if you're a young guy. So it's probably for the best for him.
Oh, 100%, Dave. I mean, he needs, as Tito just said, he needs some fine-tuning down there. He needs to go down there and he needs to hit the ball on the nose and not worrying about striking out 4 times in a game. And so fortunately, the Indians are in a position right now where, they can make that move. And I'll tell you what, I think it's the first of several moves we're probably going to see this week. It's not going to surprise me at all if we do see Owen Miller by the end of this weekend and potentially Bobby Bradley and maybe a couple others. You've got Jordan Luplow now who could be headed towards the injured list with after rolling his ankle again. So potentially I think we could see some turnover here in the next couple of days on the Indians roster.
Yeah, and you mentioned Owen Miller, and that is a guy that's really getting it done at AAA. Miller is hitting .479, 5 doubles, a home run, 7 runs batted in. He's played 12 games at AAA and has 23 hits. That's pretty good, and that could be...
That ain't bad.
That could be used, and he can play all over the infield. Now, the challenge with him, he's not on the 40-man, so they have to find a spot on the 40-man for him, which could, again, necessitate, a chain reaction. It's likely that they're going to send Mejia back down. That's a guy that's normally a starter.
Right. Yeah, I think there's some other moves that could happen as well. I think Sam Hentges is another guy who could potentially end up down in Columbus for a little fine-tuning, if you will. I'm not sure he wasn't necessarily used in the right role, in my opinion, just starting the other night. He seems to be more of like a bullpen guy, maybe, somebody, a left-hander that they could use in matchup situations late in games. But, yeah, I mean, Owen Miller is a guy that we've been hearing about since spring training. I mean, he's just been hitting the ball hard, and it hasn't stopped. I would caution people, though, it's very different, as we talked about with Jimenez. It's very different hitting at the AAA level and then coming up and facing major league pitchers at bat after at bat. So I could also see them, bringing up maybe a couple of guys and having almost like a support system of the young guys, so they're not necessarily feeling the weight of that and that pressure of delivering for a lineup that, let's be honest, has struggled for a good portion of this year. So I do think we'll see him by the end of the weekend, and I think it'll be exciting to have a young guy up there that fans can get behind. And, as for as much as people have grumbled about this Indians team to begin the year, they're 22-18 and right in the thick of the AL Central, which is exactly where I thought they would be. And I don't see any reason why they're not going to hang around most of the summer.
Yeah, I would agree. 3.5 games out of first behind the White Sox at the beginning of play. White Sox playing an afternoon game. The other thing that's been outstanding, back end of that bullpen, and Zach Meisel, Athletic Indians beat reporter, tweeted this out, and we'll give him credit because he did the math and the legwork with it. So back end of the bullpen trio, Shaw, Clase, Karinchak, 103, 71 strikeouts, 52 in a third innings. I got to ask you, Tom, is that pretty good, or what do you think?
Yeah, that ain't bad. We got to come up with some kind of a catchy nickname for the back end of this bullpen because they have just been beyond exceptional. I mean, you could argue that James Karinchak has been as good as any reliever in baseball to this point. And, we've seen what Clase can do. The Indians have rarely had a right-handed weapon that could come out and throw a 101, 102. And, he's had his struggles of late. And I think we also forget, much like a guy like Jimenez, we forget how young a guy like Clase is. And we forget that he also didn't pitch last year in the major league. So, they've got some great weapons back there. And I'll tell you what, I've been really impressed with the way Brian Shaw has kind of reinvented himself. He's a guy that was, let's be honest, a target of fan abuse in 2017 when he was here last. And he went out to Colorado and had 2 really tough years and then went to Seattle and kind of reinvented himself. And he's throwing some pitches now that we didn't see in his repertoire the first time he was here. And he's getting guys out. He made Ohtani look, pretty foolish last night during an at-bat there in the 8th inning and then struck out a pair and set the table for Karinchak to come in and finish the job. So, yeah, in that bullpen, I think, Francona has a weapon maybe unlike anybody else in the American League.
Real quick before I let you go, let's shift our focus to the Cavs. A disappointing season, lots of injuries to a young team, never a recipe that adds up to wins. Do you think there's a potential shakeup in that front office? They haven't met with the media typically. Terry Pluto pointed that out, and I hadn't thought of it. They didn't do the end of the year, let's go through things, and that has me thinking, man, there might be something to that shakeup idea.
Well, we've seen shakeups over there with the Cavs before, haven't we? And that wouldn't surprise me at all. We all have to remember that, that Dan Gilbert is not one to sit around and let things fester or get worse. So, I'll be honest with you though, Dave, I don't think it's going to happen. And I'm probably jinxing myself now by saying this, but there were so many variables at play. Let's not forget how well the Cavs were playing a year ago before the pandemic shut the season down. And Bickerstaff really never got a chance to build off of that. And then when you multiply that by the continued pandemic on top of injuries, on top of a young team, on top of trades, on top of what they decided to do with Andre Drummond, what they decided to do with Kevin Porter Jr., which is a situation that none of us even really got to the bottom of because we weren't around the team because of the protocols this year. So I think that all adds up to a situation where maybe you let things just calm down a little bit. You head into next season with essentially what you have now. Hopefully, obviously, you get some luck in the draft. You can maybe make a free agency move or two and make this roster better. But it was so young. It was so banged up. There were so many things going on that I just think another front office shakeup was just going to make things worse at this point.
Tom Withers, Associated Press reporter, as always. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tom.
My pleasure, Dave. Good seeing you.
All right, good seeing you, too. Tom Withers, Associated Press reporter. As always, we appreciate his time and insight. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We will be joined by cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer's Tim Bielik. We're going to talk a little bit more Browns. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Life is starting to get back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with full tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tric-edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for summer classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just the mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
Welcome back to Sports for CLE. I'm Dave Bacon. We're going to talk Browns football with Tim Bielik. Let's take a look at a tweet from J.C. Tretter, Browns starting center, also the president of the Players Association. And this is on virtual OTAs. So players taking back control of their offseason now more than ever. Whether it's popular or not, it's a win for the players. Let's welcome in Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. And Tim, when you look at that, how big of a deal do you think it is that some teams will have in-person OTAs, some will have virtual like the Browns? Is that a big deal? What do you make of it?
I think it's really only a big deal if you have a lot of staff turnover. When it comes to the Browns, I mean, the coaching staff's basically intact. Last year, you could obviously see a case where you would want to have guys in for OTAs. This year, maybe not as much. Obviously, because, again, that there's that continuity. You're kind of just building off what's already there. There's benefit to certain guys being there. Obviously, guys like Brant Delpit and Greedy Williams coming off injuries, guys like that just need to get some more work in. That's beneficial for them, probably the rookies as well, to continue to get integrated into the NFL. But I think from the Browns' perspective, because of where they are, they could probably just get away, I think, with the mandatory mini camp. Maybe guys show up here or there, possibly for the OTAs. But I think pretty much just because of all that veteranship that they have, that they may be good to go with just the mini camp and training camp.
The other thing is that it was successful for Kevin Stefanski and this staff last year. They were forced to do it, and as you mentioned, they were installing a new system, and it worked. So clearly, the Browns have an idea of how to make this work for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what's really impressed me about the coaching staff is how, with mostly virtual practices until we got to July of last year with training camp and all those things. And even with the ramp up of training camp, because remember, it took about a week to a week and a half for practices to really get started. So I think they really did a good job of teaching efficiently. It took a little bit of time, of course, for them to hit their stride. It took time for Baker Mayfield to hit his stride. That's normal. I think when you're installing a new scheme, you're trying to get your timing readjusted with receivers when you aren't able to get together with them. But I think obviously it's just a testament to what those coaches were able to do.
Now, you wrote an interesting article in the Plain Dealer where Stefanski and the Browns rank among the biggest turnarounds in Cleveland sports history. So take us through that, what you found and what impressed you about Kevin Stefanski and the turnaround that the Browns made. Getting to the playoffs and then beating the Steelers, winning a playoff game, and finally losing to the Chiefs a season ago.
Well, the way I ranked these turnarounds, I ranked them based off the increase of winning percentage. So it wasn't necessarily based on, this team improved 2 wins, but they went further in the playoffs. It was pretty much strictly based on winning percentage. So I had the 2020 Browns at number 5. They improved 5 wins. That's an increase of about 313 win percentage. If I'm looking at overall impact on just what it means to the franchise, it would probably be way higher. I would probably put it as high as number 2 because I have the 2018 Browns number 1 in there for win percentage, and I think that can't be understated how important that was because they were the worst team in the league, and they immediately went to a near 500 team in almost a blink of an eye, and I think that can't be ignored. But it's easy to go from bad to kind of middle of the road. It's much harder to go from middle of the road to very good. And that's where I think the 2020 Browns really showed something because this was a team that disappointed, as we all know, in 2019 going 6-10. Kevin Stefanski and staff had their work cut out for them, and they made the most of it. They developed an identity early. You had the running game really take off with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and then Baker got hot in the second half of the season, and winning a playoff game and getting to a second one obviously is just huge for this team going forward. And if they're able to make the Super Bowl or whatever down the road, you can look back at 2020 as possibly a start of when things really got going in that direction.
The other thing that, as we're talking about this, that impressed me with Kevin Stefanski, let me know if you agree, they were very good at developing players, even in the framework of a season. You had guys that were signed, off the street basically, that were coming in and making significant contributions. You had late round picks like Donovan Peoples-Jones making significant contributions. To me, does that speak to coaching or is it something else, do you think?
I think coaching plays a huge role in it. I mean, we talked before about this coaching staff and how they've obviously developed talent. We heard Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah talk at rookie camp about how he was impressed at the attention to detail of the coaching staff, and that shows through when you have younger players that take the strides that guys like Donovan Peoples-Jones did. I mean, obviously he went from a guy who was mostly a blocker out there to you saw him in the playoff game against the Chiefs being asked to be out there and have him make big catches as essentially your third receiver. So they did a really good job developing guys and continue to just work on things. And I think those are the things that happen throughout a season as players get more familiar with the system. There's more chemistry that gets developed in practices and things like that. And good coaches really know how to get the most out of players. And I think we saw some of that last season.
So the Bleacher Report has one move each Super Bowl contender can make to put them over the top. And for the Browns, they have signed Stevie Nelson. What do you think of that? Would that be a significant improvement? What are your thoughts?
I think that'd be pretty significant for the fact that you could probably push either Greedy Williams you would have either Steven Nelson, Greedy Williams, or Greg Newsome be the fifth corner. If they're the fifth corner on this football team, that's a very good thing in terms of depth. I remember I was actually putting stuff together for our NFL roundup that I do daily. I was reading through what Baltimore defensive coordinator Wink Martindale said when it came to defending the passing game. And it's not so much that if you want to affect the quarterback, it's not necessarily about having pass rushers. He said he wants more cover corners. And I found that interesting because we clearly saw the Browns take that approach in free agency, you know, adding John Johnson and Troy Hill to the secondary, drafting Greg Newsome in the first round. They're clearly taking that kind of approach right now, where you obviously want to have a multitude of guys who can cover. And if you put Steven Nelson on this team, then I think you have potentially 5 guys in that secondary between Nelson, Greedy, Newsome, Troy Hill, and Denzel Ward, who could all cover at least a pretty solid level. When you have 5 guys that can do that can rotate in and out of a game at any time, you've got a pretty deep secondary that can sustain a good level of play for an entire game.
Tim Bielik, reporter for cleveland.com, as well as the pages of the Plain Dealer. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We're going to take a look at Pro Football Focus wide receiver rankings, and also what one scout thinks of the Browns roster in the AFC North. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Life is starting to get back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with full tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tric-edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for summer classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just a mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
Sports for CLE continues. We continue talking football with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. Tim, let's take a look. Pro Football Focus ranked the wide receivers in the NFL. They have Odell Beckham at 18, Jarvis Landry at 21. Top 4, Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Tyreek Hill, Allen Robinson from the Bears. What do you think of the rankings and just where Landry and Beckham rank?
I think they're kind of in the spots where I would expect them to be. I mean, when it comes to Odell Beckham, it makes sense why he's ranked ahead of Jarvis Landry. I think his potential to make impact plays in the game is higher than Landry. I think Landry is obviously very dependable, but as we saw in the Dallas game, Odell Beckham Jr. can single-handedly win a game for you. I mean, he had 3 touchdowns, and you look at that end around he had in the fourth quarter, you could argue that is the signature play of the season right there. I mean, he single-handedly put the team on his back and won that game, and that shows the talent he still has. I know he's had some injuries. He's coming off an ACL, and he's had some chemistry issues with Baker Mayfield, but it still makes sense to put him in this spot. I look at the guys right in front of him, Kenny Golladay with the Giants, Corey Davis with the Jets. Maybe the only one I would put ahead of Beckham right now in that group is Tyler Lockett of the Seahawks. I absolutely love him as far as a weapon for Russell Wilson. I think he's pretty reliable. When I look at the top 4, I would probably have DeAndre Hopkins ahead of Devontae Adams, but you know, it's hard to argue with the top 4 as it is. especially because I think Hopkins was so beneficial to Kyler Murray last season in Arizona.
Yeah, and the guys that are top 4 are usually high-volume guys, and the Browns just aren't going to have somebody that they throw the football to that much. Let's take a look. Matt Miller at NFL Draft Scout tweets this out about the AFC North roster. So finalizing roster grades, and the Browns are loaded. If we get the year 2 bump from this offense, they're going to be dangerous. There isn't an obvious hole or weakness on the entire roster. So Tim, let me get your reaction to that. What do you think about that? And that's a guy that breaks down the video and looks significantly and grades each of those teams.
I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, we're talking about the Browns being a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Now, if Baker Mayfield takes the step that I think we expect him to take in 2021, where he's kind of borderline Pro Bowler, this team could be right up there challenging the Chiefs for the AFC Championship. And Matt Miller's got a point. You look at this roster, it's hard to find holes in it. And when the starting 22, there's really not much to pick at right now as far as holes. Now, obviously, these guys got to play on the field. We got to see how the improved talent, what on defense, what that means for Joe Woods, how they fit into his scheme, how Grant Delphi comes back from his torn Achilles, how certain guys like Jedrick Wills improve in their second season. But on paper right now, this is a very legitimate team that has a good shot to be in Los Angeles. It just kind of comes down to if they can execute the way they did last season when it mattered, and can they handle high expectations, unlike they were able to do in 2019.
Yeah, the other thing would be, can you stay healthy? Do you think the entire so we've made a big deal about Baker Mayfield being in the same system for 2 years in a row, but really it's the first time the Browns offense will be remotely the same because they kept changing offensive coordinators and head coaches.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be a load off their minds, knowing that they don't have to go into training camp relearning a new system. It's like in high school, you don't have to take Algebra 1 again. You get to progress on to Algebra 2 or even Calculus, where you can start to advance the offense, really flesh things out a little more. And that's going to make it easier on the coaching staff, knowing that you don't have to teach guys a whole bunch of things over again. You can adopt the same principles. You're not reteaching anything. You're just kind of going off the same things you worked on a year ago, but just continuing to advance. And these coaches have a full year of tape of these guys in the system, so they know what works well for them. They know what doesn't work well. And as we saw for last season, especially late with Baker Mayfield, Kevin Stefanski knows how to cater his offense to the strengths of his players. And I think that's what good coaches really do, is you mold what you want to do into around who you have. That's what we saw from them. And I think it's just going to be more so done this year.
The other thing is Kevin Stefanski even made a point of saying he kind of understood what Baker Mayfield can do, and I think that's what you're getting at. He knows Baker Mayfield. He's going to play to his strengths.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we all saw how good Baker Mayfield was, on play action, rolling him out. And I think the underrated skill that I think always gets forgotten about with Baker is how good he is in the red zone. And I think that's where you really separate quarterbacks, is how effective they are inside the opponent's 20. He was very effective at it, threw a lot of touchdowns, and I'm fascinated the steps he makes if he continues to be more accurate, more of a threat down the field, especially when you add a speedster like Anthony Schwartz in certain situations. If you get Odell back at even 90%, what kind of threat he can be in the deep game. I think that's the next evolution, is how much more do they use Baker in kind of a full field passing game. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Tim Bielik, reporter for The Plain Dealer, as well as here on cleveland.com. Tim, as always, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much.
You got it. Thanks for having me.
All right, Tim Bielik from The Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. We are all out of time on this edition of Sports4CLE. We will see you again tomorrow. A scheduled guest, Jeff Risdon from brownswire.com, Daryl Ryder from 92.3 The Fan. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock. We hope you join us. We will see you again. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow right here on Sports4CLE.